Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, born on the 12th of August in 1831 to the 8th of May 1891, she was often known as Madame Blavatsky. And she was a Russian-born mystic and writer who emigrated to the United States, where she co-founded the Theosophical Society in 1875. She gained an international following as the primary founder of Theosophy as a belief system. Born into an aristocratic family in Yekaterinoslav, Blavatsky traveled widely around the empire as a child. Largely self-educated, she developed an interest in Western esotericism during her teenage years. According to her later claims, in 1849, she embarked on a series of world travels, visiting Europe, the Americas, and India. She also claimed that during this period, she encountered a group of spiritual adepts, the masters of the ancient wisdom, who sent her to Shagatz, Tibet, where they trained her to develop a deeper understanding of the synthesis of religion, philosophy, and science. By the early 1870s, Blavatsky was involved in the spiritualist movement, although defending the genuine existence of spiritualist phenomena. She argued against the mainstream spiritualist idea that the entities contacted were the spirits of the dead. Relocating to the United States in 1873, she befriended Henry Steele Olcott, and who rose to public attention as a spirit medium, attention that included public accusations of fraudulence. In 1875, in New York City, Blavatsky co-founded the Theosophical Society with Olcott and William Quan Judge. In 1877, she published Isis Unveiled, which is a book outlining her theosophical worldview that was closely associated with the esoteric doctrines of Hermeticism and Neoplatonism. Blavatsky described theosophy as the synthesis of science, religion, and philosophy, proclaiming that it was reviving an ancient wisdom which underlay all the world's religions. In 1880, she and Olcott moved to India, where the society tried to make allies to the Arya Samaj, a Hindu reform movement. On 26th of March in 1882, Maharishi Dayananda spoke about the humbuggery of the Theosophists. That same year, while in Ceylon, she and Olcott became the first people from the United States to formally convert to Buddhism. Although opposed by the British colonial administration, Theosophy spread rapidly in India but experienced internal problems after Blavatsky was accused of producing fraudulent paranormal phenomena. In ailing health, in 1885, she returned to Europe, and she established the Blavatsky Lodge in London. There she published The Secret Doctrine, which was a commentary on what she claimed were ancient Tibetan manuscripts, as well as two further books, The Key to Theosophy and The Voice of the Silence, and she finally passed on of influenza in 1891. Blavatsky was a controversial figure during her lifetime, and she was championed by supporters as an enlightened sage and derided as a charlatan by critics. Her theosophical doctrines influenced the spread of Hindu and Buddhist ideas in the West, as well as the development of Western esoteric currents like Ariosophy, Anthroposophy, and the New Age movement. Developing a reliable account of Blavatsky's life has proved difficult for biographers because in later life she deliberately provided contradictory accounts and falsifications about her own past. Furthermore, very few of her own writings written before 1873 has survived, meaning that biographers must rely heavily on these unreliable later accounts. The accounts of her early life provided by her family members have also been considered dubious by biographers. Blavatsky was born as Helena Petrovna Hahn von Rottenstern in the town of Yekaterinoslav in the Russian Empire, that it is now called Dnipro in the Ukraine. Her birth date was August 12, 1831, although according to the Julian calendar used in 19th century Russia, it was 31st of July. Immediately after her birth, she was baptized into the Russian Orthodox Church. At the time, Yekaterinoslav was undergoing a cholera epidemic, and her mother contracted the disease shortly after childbirth. Despite the expectations of their doctor, both the mother and child survived the epidemic. Blavatsky's family was aristocratic. Her mother was Helena Andreevna Hahn von Rottenstern, Russian, 1814 to 1842, and she was a self-educated 17-year-old who was the daughter of Princess Yelena Pavlovna Dolgorukia, who was a similarly self-educated aristocrat. Blavatsky's father was Pyotr Alexeyevich Hahn von Rottenstern, Russian, 1798 to 1873, and he was a descendant of the German Hahn aristocratic family, who served as a captain in the Russian Royal Horse Artillery and would later rise to the rank of colonel. Pyotr had not been present at his daughter's birth, having been in Poland fighting to suppress the November uprising against Russian rule, and he first saw her when she was 6 months old. As well as her Russian and German ancestry, Blavatsky could also claim French heritage, for a great-great-grandfather had been a French Huguenot nobleman who had fled to Russia to escape persecution, once there serving in the court of Catherine the Great. As a result of Pyotr's career, the family frequently moved to different parts of the empire, accompanied by their servants. This was a mobile childhood that may have influenced Blavatsky's largely nomadic lifestyle in her later life. A year after Pyotr's arrival in Yekaterinoslav, the family relocated to the nearby army town of Romankovo. When Blavatsky was 2 years old, her younger brother, Sasha, died in another army town when no medical help could be found. In 1835, both mother and daughter moved to Odessa, where Blavatsky's maternal grandfather Andrei Fedyev, a civil administrator for the imperial authorities, had recently been posted. It was in this city that Blavatsky's sister Vera Petrovna was born. After a return to rural Ukraine, Pyotr was posted to St. Petersburg, where the family moved in 1836. Blavatsky's mother liked the city, and while there she established her own literary career, penning novels under the pseudonym of Zenaida Republican Virginia, and translating the works of the English novelist Edward Bulwer-Lytton for Russian publication. When Pyotr returned to Ukraine in 1837, she remained in the city. After Fedyev was assigned to become a trustee for the Kalmyk people of Central Asia, Blavatsky and her mother accompanied him to Astrakhan, where they befriended a Kalmyk leader, Tuman. The Kalmyks were practitioners of Tibetan Buddhism, and it was there that Blavatsky gained her first experience with the religion. In 1838, Blavatsky's mother moved with her daughters to be with her husband at Poltava, where she taught Blavatsky how to play the piano and organized for her to take dance lessons. As a result of her poor health, Blavatsky's mother returned to Odessa, where Blavatsky learned English from a British governess. After that, they moved to Saratov, where her brother, Leonid, was born in June of 1840. The family proceeded to Poland and then back to Odessa, where Blavatsky's mother died of tuberculosis in June of 1842 at the age of 28. The 3 surviving children were sent to live with their maternal grandparents in Saratov, where their grandfather Andrei had been appointed governor of Saratov Governorate. The historian Richard Davenport Hines described the young Blavatsky as a petted, wayward, invalid child who was a beguiling storyteller. Accounts provided by relatives reveal that she socialized largely with lower-class children and that she enjoyed playing pranks and reading. She was educated in French, art and music, and they were all subjects designed to enable her to find a husband with her grandparents. She holidayed in Tuman's Kalmyk summer camp, where she learned horse riding and also some Tibetan. She later claimed that in Saratov, she discovered the personal library of her maternal great-grandfather, who was Prince Pavel Vasilievich Dolgorukov, born in 1838, and the library contained a variety of books on esoteric subjects, encouraging her burgeoning interest in it. Dolgorukov had been initiated into Freemasonry in the late 1770s, and he had belonged to the rite of strict observance. There were rumors that he had met both Alessandro Cagliostro and the Count of St. Germain. She also later stated that at this time of life she began to experience visions in which she encountered a mysterious Indian man, and that in later life she would meet this man in the flesh. Many biographers have considered this to be the first appearance of the masters in her life story. According to some of her later accounts, in 1844 to 1845 Blavatsky was taken by her father to England, where she visited both London and Bath. According to this story, in London she received piano lessons from the Bohemian composer Ignaz Moscheles and performed with Clara Schumann. After a year spent living with her aunt, Yekaterina Andreevna Witt, mother of the future first Prime Minister of the Russian Empire, Sergei Witt, she moved to Tiflis, Georgia, where her grandfather Andrei had been appointed director of state lands in Transcaucasia. Blavatsky claimed that she established a friendship there with Alexander Vladimirovich Golitsyn, who was a Russian Freemason and a member of the Golitsyn family who encouraged her interest in esoteric matters. She would also claim that at this period, she had further paranormal experiences, such as astral traveling and again encountering her mysterious Indian man in her visions. At the age of 17, she agreed to marry Nikifor Vladimirovich Blavatsky, a man in his 40s who worked as vice governor of Yerevan province. Her reasons for doing so were unclear, although she later claimed that she was attracted by his belief in magic. Although she tried to back out shortly before the wedding ceremony, the marriage took place on 7th of July in 1849. Moving with him to the Sardar Palace, where she made repeated unsuccessful attempts to escape and return to her family in Tiflis, to which he eventually relented. The family sent her, accompanied by a servant and maid, to Odessa to meet her father, who planned to return to St. Petersburg with her. The escorts accompanied her to Poti and then Kerch, intending to continue with her to Odessa. Blavatsky claimed that fleeing her escorts and bribing the captain of the ship that had taken her to Kerch, she reached Constantinople. This marked the start of 9 years spent traveling the world, possibly financed by her father. She did not keep a diary at the time and was not accompanied by relatives who could verify her activities. She later claimed that in Constantinople, she developed a friendship with a Hungarian opera singer named Agardie Metrovic, whom she first encountered when saving him from being murdered. It was also in Constantinople that she met the Countess Sofia Kiselyova, who she would accompany on a tour of Egypt, Greece, and Eastern Europe. In Cairo, she met the American art student Albert Rossin, who later wrote extensively about the Middle East, and together they allegedly visited a Coptic magician, Paulos Medamon. In 1851, she proceeded to Paris, where she encountered the mesmerist, Victor Michael, who impressed her. From there, she visited England and would claim that it was here that she met the mysterious Indian man who had appeared in her childhood visions, and he was a Hindu whom she referred to as the Master Morya. While she provided various conflicting accounts of how they met, locating it in both London and Ramsgate according to separate stories, she maintained that he claimed that he had a special mission for her and that she must travel to Tibet. She then made her way to Asia via the Americas, heading to Canada in the autumn of 1851. Inspired by the novels of James Fenimore Cooper, she sought out the Native American communities of Quebec in the hope of meeting their magico-religious specialists. However, unfortunately, she was robbed instead. And she later attributed the natives' behavior to the corruptive influence of the Christian missionaries. After that, she then headed south, visiting New Orleans, Texas, Mexico, and the Andes, before she was transported via ship from the West Indies to Ceylon and then Bombay. She spent 2 years in India, where she allegedly followed the instructions that were found in the letters that Maurya had sent to her. She attempted to enter Tibet, but was prevented from doing so by the British colonial administration. She later claimed that she then headed back to Europe by ship, surviving a shipwreck near to the Cape of Good Hope before arriving in England in 1854, where she faced hostility as a Russian citizen due to the ongoing Crimean War between Britain and Russia. It was there that she claimed that she worked as a concert musician for the Royal Philharmonic Society. Sailing to the United States, she visited New York City, where she met up with Rawson before touring Chicago, Salt Lake City, and San Francisco, and then sailing back to India via Japan. When she was there, she spent time in Kashmir, Ladakh, and Burma before making a second attempt to enter Tibet. She claimed that this time she was successful entering Tibet in 1856 through Kashmir, accompanied by a Tartar shaman who was attempting to reach Siberia and who thought that as a Russian citizen, Blavatsky would be able to aid him in doing so. According to this account, they reached Leh before becoming lost, eventually joining a traveling Tartar group before she headed back to India. She returned to Europe via Madras and Java. In 1858, after spending time in France and Germany, she returned to her family, then based in Pskov. She later claimed that there she began to exhibit further paranormal abilities, with rapping and creaking accompanying her around the house and furniture moving of its own volition. In 1860, she and her sister visited their maternal grandmother in Tiflis. It was there that she met up with Metrovich, and where in 1862 she reconciled with Nikifor. Together they adopted a child named Yuri, who died at 5 years of age in 1867, and she was buried under Metrovich's surname. In 1864, while riding in Mingrelia, Blavatsky fell from her horse and was in a coma for several months with a spinal fracture. While recovering in Tiflis, she claimed that upon awaking, she gained full control of her paranormal abilities. She then proceeded to Italy, Transylvania, and then to Serbia, and she possibly studied the Kabbalah with a rabbi at this point. She proceeded to the Balkans, Hungary, and then Italy in 1867, where she spent some time in Venice, Florence, and Mentana, claiming that in the latter she had been injured fighting for Giuseppe Garibaldi at the Battle of Mentana. She claimed to have then received a message from Maurya to travel to Constantinople, where he met her, and together they traveled overland to Tibet, going through Turkey, Persia, Afghanistan, and then into India, entering Tibet via Kashmir. There, they allegedly stayed in the home of Maurya's friend and colleague, Master Kuthumi, which was near to Tashil Hunpo Monastery in Shagats. According to Blavatsky, both Maurya and Kuthumi were Kashmiris of Punjabi origin, and it was at his home that Kuthumi taught students of the Gelugpa sect of Tibetan Buddhism. Kuthumi was described as having spent time in London and Leipzig, being fluent in both English and French, and like Maurya, was a vegetarian. She claimed that in Tibet, she was taught an ancient, unknown language known as Senzur, and translated a number of ancient texts written in this language that were preserved by the monks of a monastery. She stated that she was, however, not permitted entry into the monastery itself. She also claimed that while in Tibet, Maurya and Kuthumi helped her develop and control her psychic powers. Among the abilities that she ascribed to these masters were clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy, and the ability to control another's consciousness, to dematerialize and rematerialize physical objects, and to project their astral bodies. thus giving the appearance of being in two places at once. She claimed to have remained on this spiritual retreat from late 1868 until late 1870. Blavatsky never claimed in print to have visited Lhasa, although this is a claim that would be made for her in various later sources, including the account provided by her sister. Many critics and biographers have expressed doubt about the veracity of Blavatsky's claims regarding her visits to Tibet, which rely entirely on her own claims, lacking any credible, independent testimony. It has been highlighted that during the 19th century, Tibet was closed to Europeans, and visitors faced the perils of bandits and harsh terrain. The latter would have been even more problematic if Blavatsky had been as stout and unathletic as she would be in later life. However, as several biographers have noted, traders and pilgrims from neighboring lands were able to access Tibet freely, suggesting the possibility that she would have been allowed to enter accompanied by Maurya, particularly if she had been mistaken for an Asian. Blavatsky's eyewitness account of Shagatz was unprecedented in the West, and one scholar of Buddhism, D.T. Suzuki, suggested that she later exhibited an advanced knowledge of Mahayana Buddhism consistent with her having studied in a Tibetan monastery. Logman noted that had Blavatsky spent time in Tibet, then she would be one of the greatest travelers of the 19th century. Blavatsky alleged that she departed Tibet with the mission of proving to the world that the phenomena identified by spiritualists were objectively real, thus defending spiritualism against accusations of fraud. However, she also stated that the entities being contacted by spiritualist mediums were not the spirits of the dead, as the spiritualist movement typically alleged, but instead either mischievous elementals or the shells left behind by the deceased. She proceeded via the Suez Canal to Greece, where she met with another of the masters, Master Hilarion. She set sail for Egypt aboard the SS Eunomia. However, in July of 1871, it exploded during the journey, and Blavatsky was one of only 16 survivors. Reaching Cairo, she met up with Medamon, and with the help of a woman named Emma Cutting established a Société Spirite, which was based largely on Spiritism, a form of spiritualism founded by Allan Kardec, which professed a belief in reincarnation in contrast to the mainstream spiritualist movement. However, Blavatsky believed that Cutting and many of the mediums employed by the society were fraudulent, and she closed it down after 2 weeks. Whilst in Cairo, she also met with the Egyptologist Gaston Maspero and Serapis Bey, another of the masters. It was also here that she met up with Metrovich, although he soon died of typhoid, with Blavatsky claiming to have overseen the funeral. Whilst leaving Egypt, she proceeded to Syria, Palestine, and Lebanon, there encountering members of the Druze religion. It was during these travels that she met with the writer and traveler Lydia Pashkova, who provided independent verification of Blavatsky's travels during this period. In July 1872, she returned to her family in Odessa before departing in April of 1873. She spent time in Bucharest and Paris before, according to her later claims, Maurya instructed her to go to the United States. Blavatsky arrived in New York City on 8th of July, and while she was there, she moved into a women's housing cooperative on Madison Street in Manhattan's Lower East Side, earning a wage through piecework, sewing, and designing advertising cards. It was here that she attracted attention and was interviewed by the journalist Anna Ballard of the New York newspaper The Sun. This interview was the earliest textual source in which Blavatsky claimed to have spent time in Tibet. Indeed, it was while in New York that detailed records of Blavatsky's life again become available to historians. Soon after, Blavatsky received news of her father's death, thus inheriting a considerable fortune, allowing her to move into a lavish hotel. In December 1874, Blavatsky met the Georgian Mikhail Bettinelli. Infatuated with her, he repeatedly requested that they marry, to which she ultimately relented. This constituted bigamy, as her first husband was still alive. However, as she refused to consummate the marriage, Bettinelli sued for divorce and returned to Georgia. Blavatsky was intrigued by a news story about William and Horatio Eddy, brothers based in Chittenden, Vermont, who it was claimed could levitate and manifest spiritual phenomena. She visited Chittenden in October of 1874, and while there she met the reporter Henry Steele Olcott, who was investigating the brothers' claims for the Daily Graphic. Claiming that Blavatsky impressed him with her own ability to manifest spirit phenomena, Olcott authored a newspaper article on her. They soon became close friends, giving each other the nicknames of Maloney Olcott and Jack Blavatsky. He helped attract greater attention to Blavatsky's claims, encouraging the Daily Graphic's editor to publish an interview with her and discussing her in his book on spiritualism. People from the Other World 1875 that her Russian correspondent Alexander Aksakov urged her to translate into Russian. She began to instruct Olcott in her own occult beliefs, and encouraged by her he became a celibate, teetotaling, and became a vegetarian, although she herself was unable to commit to the latter. In January of 1875, the duo visited the spiritualist mediums Nelson and Jenny Owen in Philadelphia. The Owens asked Olcott to test them to prove that the phenomena that they produced were not fraudulent, and while Olcott believed them, Blavatsky opined that they faked some of their phenomena in those instances when genuine phenomena failed to manifest. Drumming up interest for their ideas, Blavatsky and Olcott published a circular letter in Eldridge Jerry Brown's Boston-based spiritualist publication, The Spiritual Scientist. There, they named themselves the Brotherhood of Luxor, a name potentially inspired by the pre-existing Hermetic Brotherhood of Luxor. They began living together in a series of rented apartments in New York City, which they decorated with taxidermized animals and images of spiritual figures. Their life was funded largely by Olcott's continued work as a lawyer. Their last such apartment came to be known as the Lamasery. Allegedly encouraged by the masters, Blavatsky and Olcott established the Miracle Club, through which they facilitated lectures on esoteric themes in New York City. It was through this group that they met an Irish spiritualist, William Quan Judge, who shared many of their interests. At a Miracle Club meeting on the 7th of September in 1875, Blavatsky, Olcott, and Judge agreed to establish an esoteric organization, with Charles Sutherland suggesting that they call it the Theosophical Society. The term theosophy came from the Greek word theos, meaning God or God, sans Sophia, wisdom, thus meaning God wisdom or divine wisdom. The term was not new, but had been previously used in various contexts by the Philhellethians and the Christian mystic, Jacob Boehme. Theosophists would often argue over how to define theosophy, with Judge expressing the view that the task was impossible. Blavatsky, however, insisted that theosophy was not a religion in itself. Lockman has described the movement as a very wide umbrella, under which quite a few things could find a place. On foundation, Olcott was appointed chairman, with Judge as secretary and Blavatsky as corresponding secretary, although she remained the group's primary theoretician and leading figure. Prominent early members included Emma Hardinge Britton, Senior Brazisi, C.C. Massey, and William L. Alden. Many were prominent and successful members of the establishment, although not all would remain members for long. The underlying theme among these diverse topics in Isis Unveiled is the existence of an ancient wisdom religion, an ageless occult guide to the cosmos, nature, and human life. The many faiths of man are said to derive from a universal religion known to both Plato and the ancient Hindu sages. The wisdom religion is also identified with Hermetic philosophy as the only possible key to the absolute in science and theology. Every religion is based on the same truth or secret doctrine, which contains the alpha and omega of universal science, and finally this ancient wisdom religion will become the religion of the future. In 1875, Blavatsky began work on a book outlining her theosophical worldview, much of which would be written during a stay in the Ithaca home of Hiram Corson, a professor of English literature at Cornell University. Although she had hoped to call it The Veil of Isis, it would be published as Isis Unveiled. While writing it, Blavatsky claimed to be aware of a second consciousness within her body, referring to it as the lodger who is in me, and stating that it was this second consciousness that inspired much of the writing. In Isis Unveiled, Blavatsky quoted extensively from other esoteric and religious texts, although her contemporary and colleague Alcott always maintained that she had quoted from books that she did not have access to. Writing more than a century after her death, Lockman conjectured that if this had been the case, then she had had an eidetic memory, such that, while relying on earlier sources, the book represented an original synthesis that connected disparate ideas not brought together before. Revolving around Blavatsky's idea that the world's religions all stemmed from a single ancient wisdom that she connected to ancient Hermeticism and Neoplatonism of Western esotericism, and she also articulated her thoughts on spiritualism, and provided a criticism of Darwinian evolution, stating that it dealt only with the physical world and ignored the spiritual realms. The book was edited by Professor of Philosophy Alexander Wilder and published in 2 volumes by J.W. Boughton in 1877. Although facing negative mainstream press reviews, including from those who highlighted that it extensively quoted around 100 other books without acknowledgement, it proved to be such a commercial success, with its initial print run of 1,000 copies selling out in a week, that the publisher requested a sequel, although Blavatsky turned down the offer. While Isis Unveiled was a success, the society remained largely inactive, having fallen into this state in autumn 1876. This was despite the fact that new lodges of the organization had been established throughout the United States and in London, and prominent figures like Thomas Edison and Abner Doubleday had joined. In July of 1878, Blavatsky gained United States citizenship. The Theosophical Society established links with an Indian Hindu reform movement, the Arya Samaj, which had been founded by the Swami Dayananda Sarasvati. Blavatsky and Alcott believed that the 2 organizations shared a common spiritual worldview. Unhappy with life in the United States, Blavatsky decided to move to India, with Alcott agreeing to join her, securing work as a United States trade representative to the country. In December, the duo auctioned off many of their possessions, although Edison gifted them a phonograph to take with them to India. They left New York City aboard the Canada, which took them to London. After meeting with well-wishers in the capital, they traveled to Liverpool, and once they're setting sail aboard the Speak Hall, arriving in Bombay in February of 1879. In the city, they were greeted with celebrations organized by Arya Samaj member Harichand Chintaman before obtaining a house in Gurgaon Road, part of Bombay's native area. Associating largely with Indians rather than the governing British elite, Blavatsky took a 15-year-old Gujarati boy, Vala Babula Bulla, as her personal servant. Many educated Indians were impressed with the Theosophists' championing of Indian religions, coming about during a period of India's growing self-assertion against the values and beliefs of the British Empire. Her activity in the city was monitored by British intelligence services, who suspected that she was working for Russia. In April, Blavatsky took Olcott, Babula, and their friend Mulji Thackeray to the Karla Caves, announcing that they contained secret passages that led to an underground place where the masters assembled. Then claiming that the masters were telepathically commanding her to head to Rajputana in the Punjab, she and Olcott headed north. At the Yamuna River, they met the sannyasin Babu Surdis, who had sat in the lotus position for 52 years, and in Agra saw the Taj Mahal. In Saharanpur, they met with Dayananda and his Arya Samajists before returning to Bombay. In July of 1879, Blavatsky and Olcott began work on a monthly magazine, The Theosophist, with the first issue coming out in October. The magazine soon obtained a large readership, with the management being taken over by Damodar K. Mavalankar, a theosophist who introduced the idea of referring to the masters as Mahatmas. In December, Blavatsky and Olcott traveled to Allahabad, and whilst they were there visiting Alfred Percy Sinnett, the editor of the pioneer and keen spiritualist A.O. Hume was also a guest at the Sinnett's home, and Blavatsky was encouraged to manifest paranormal phenomena in their presence. From there, they traveled to Benares, where they stayed at the palace of the Maharaja of Vizianagram. Blavatsky and Olcott were then invited to Ceylon by Buddhist monks. There they officially converted to Buddhism, and they were apparently the first from the United States to do so, one taking the 5 precepts in a ceremony at Ramayana Nikayana in May of 1880, and 2 touring the island, where they were met by crowds intrigued by these unusual Westerners who embraced Buddhism rather than proselytizing Christianity. Their message proved a boost to Sinhalese nationalist self-esteem, and they were invited to see the Buddha's tooth in Kandy. Upon learning that old comrade Emma Coulomb, née Cutting, and her husband had fallen into poverty in Ceylon, Blavatsky invited them to move into her home in Bombay. However, the Coulombs annoyed Rosa Bates and Edward Winbridge, 2 American theosophists who were also living with Blavatsky. When Blavatsky took the side of the Coulombs, Bates and Winbridge returned to the United States, and Blavatsky was then invited to Simla to spend more time with Sinnett, and whilst there she performed a range of materializations that astounded the other guests. In one instance, she allegedly made a cup and saucer materialize under the soil during a picnic. Sinnett was eager to contact the masters himself, convincing Blavatsky to facilitate this communication, resulting in the production of over 1,400 pages allegedly authored by Kut Homi and Maurya, which came to be known as the Mahatma Letters. Sinnett summarized the teachings contained in these letters in his book Esoteric Buddhism in 1883, although scholars of Buddhism like Max Muller publicly highlighted that the contents were not Buddhist, and Blavatsky herself disliked the misleading title. Since the book's publication, there has been much debate as to the authenticity of the letters, with some arguing that they were written by Blavatsky herself and others believing that they were written by separate individuals. According to Mead, there can be no reasonable doubt that Helena was their author. Theosophy was unpopular with both Christian missionaries and the British colonial administration, with India's English-language press being almost uniformly negative toward the society. Nevertheless, the group proved popular and branches were established across the country. While Blavatsky had emphasized its growth among the native Indian population rather than among the British elite, she moved into a comfortable bungalow in the elite Bombay suburb of Breach Candy, which she said was more accessible to Western visitors. Alcott had decided to establish the Buddhist Education Fund to combat the spread of the Christian faith in Ceylon and encourage pride and interest in Buddhism among the island's Sinhalese population. Although Blavatsky was initially opposed to the idea, stating that the masters would not approve, Alcott's project proved a success, and then she changed her opinion about it. Blavatsky had been diagnosed with Bright's disease, and hoping the weather to be more conducive to her condition, she took up the offer of the Society's Madras branch to move to their city. However, in November 1882, the Society purchased an estate in Udyar, which became their permanent headquarters. A few rooms were set aside for Blavatsky, who moved into them in December. She continued to tour the subcontinent, claiming that she then spent time in Sikkim and Tibet, where she visited her teacher's ashram for several days. With her health deteriorating, she agreed to accompany Alcott on his trip to Britain, where he was planning to argue the case for Ceylonese Buddhism and sort out problems with the Society's London Lodge. Sailing to Marseille, France in March 1883, she spent time in Nice with the founder of the Theosophical Society's French branch, Marie Sinclair, Countess of Caithness, widow of James Sinclair, 14th Earl of Caithness, with whom she continued to Paris. In London, she appeared at the lodge's meeting, where she sought to quell arguments between Sinnott on the one hand and Anna Kingsford and Edward Maitland on the other. Unsatisfied, Kingsford, whom Blavatsky thought an unbearable snobbish woman, split from the Theosophical Society to form the Hermetic Society. While she was in London, Blavatsky made contact with the Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, through Frederick W. H. Myers. She complied with their request to undertake a study of her and the paranormal abilities that she claimed to possess, although she wasn't impressed by the organization and mockingly referred to it as the Spookical Research Society. With Blavatsky in Europe, trouble broke out at the Society's Udyar headquarters in what became known as the Coulomb Affair. The Society's Board of Control had accused Emma Coulomb of misappropriating their funds for her own purposes, and they asked her to leave their center. She and her husband refused, blackmailing the Society with letters that they claimed were written by Blavatsky and which proved that her paranormal abilities were fraudulent. The Society refused to pay them and expelled them from their premises, at which the couple turned to the Madras-based Christian College magazine, who published an expose of Blavatsky's alleged fraudulence using the Coulomb's claims as a basis. The story attracted international attention and was picked up by London-based newspaper, The Times. In response, in November of 1884, Blavatsky headed to Cairo, where she and Theosophist Charles Webster Leadbeater searched for negative information on Emma Coulomb, discovering stories of her alleged former history of extortion and criminality. Internally, the Society was greatly damaged by the Coulomb affair, although it remained popular in India, as did Blavatsky herself. As her health got worse, this led Blavatsky to contemplate a return to the milder climate of Europe, and resigning her position as corresponding secretary of the Society, she left India in March 1885. By 1885, the Theosophical Society had experienced rapid growth, with 121 lodges having been chartered across the world, 106 of which were located in India, Burma, and Ceylon. Initially, each lodge was chartered directly from the Udyar headquarters, with members making democratic decisions by vote. However, over the coming years, the lodges were organized into national units with their own ruling councils, resulting in tensions between the different levels of administration. Settling at Naples in Italy, On April 1885, she began living off of a small society pension and continued working on her next book, The Secret Doctrine. She then moved to the Kingdom of Bavaria at Würzburg, where she was visited by a Swedish theosophist, the Countess Constance Wachtmeister, who became her constant companion throughout the rest of her life. On December of 1885, the SPR published their report on Blavatsky and her alleged phenomena, authored by Richard Hodgson. Hodgson accused Blavatsky of being a spy for the Russian government in his report. Further, he accused her of faking paranormal phenomena, largely on the basis of the Kalam's claims. The report caused much tension within the society, with a number of Blavatsky's followers, among them Babaji and Subha Roy, denouncing her and resigning from the organization on the basis of it. For our own part, we regard Blavatsky as neither the mouthpiece of hidden seers, nor as a mere vulgar adventuress. We think that she has achieved a title to permanent remembrance as one of the most accomplished, ingenious, and interesting impostors in history. The statement of the Society for Psychical Research on the basis of the Hodgson report. Blavatsky wanted to sue her accusers, although Olcott advised her against it, believing that the surrounding publicity would damage the society. In Blavatsky's private letters, she expressed relief that the criticism was focused on her and that the identity of the masters had not been publicly exposed. For decades after, Theosophists criticized Hodgson's methodology, arguing that he set out to disprove and attack Blavatsky rather than conduct an unbiased analysis of her claims and abilities.